Metals and Nature in the Middle Ages. Hello, my name is Giles Gasper, Professor of High Medieval History at Durham University. I'm delighted to have been asked to talk in support of Platinum and Light from the projection studio, which is showing in the matchless setting of York Minster. What I'd like to share with you are some thoughts on the use and understanding of metals and the animal kingdom in the medieval period. While these may seem unconnected at first glance, a closer look shows how both were deeply rooted in medieval perception of the world. In both cases, a strong sense of the practical sits alongside that of the marvellous and wondrous, not to say, for modern sensibilities, the credulous. Alchemy, astrology and allegory all form an important part of how these subjects were articulated. Both metals and animals feature in particular types of sources, compilations of ancient learning, biblical wisdom and illustrations, which focus on the moral or medical role given to animals or metals, the lapidary and bestiary respectively. Within, around, across and through the understanding of the mineral and animal worlds is the medieval notion of the universe and the place of the world in the cosmos. By medieval here, I mean those societies mostly but not entirely contiguous with modern-day Europe, whose religious identity, dissent and difference notwithstanding, recognized the authority of the Pope. Christendom would have been the contemporary description. None of that necessarily presupposes a closed and narrow-minded world, although we can find easily examples of such attitudes, as in any period, but one in the present context where ideas about the world were inherited from a variety of sources. The treasure stores of learning of ancient Greece and Rome, of late antiquity and the early church, and of early medieval and contemporary Islamic age society, created an intellectual culture rich in abstract invention and practical possibility. The late 12th and early 13th century thinker Robert Grosseteste, in his treatise on the liberal arts, operated with a threefold schema for how the universe functions. Some works belong exclusively to nature, he says. Some are exclusively for humans, and some are both for humans and for nature. The liberal arts, the subjects that form the foundation for ancient and medieval learning, and cover the three arts of expression, grammar, logic and rhetoric, and the four of mathematical aspect, arithmetic, geometry, music and astronomy, exist to help in the prosecution of human works and those of humanity and nature. And as we shall see, this includes the treatment of metals. We have here an image of the universe with the world at the centre, and then we have the world itself. And we'll explain a little bit more about that later. The provision of metals formed an important part of the medieval economy, the backbone, actually and symbolically, of currency for the tools of war and cultivation, for bell casting, jewellery setting and the decoration of churches and secular dwellings, or, in the case of the golden dress associated with Margaret I of Denmark and Norway at the turn of the 15th century, literally woven into the fabric. Both the ubiquity and centrality of metal to medieval society is shown in a story about St. Dunstan, Archbishop of Canterbury at the end of the 10th century. During a period of time as a hermit, he practiced a series of crafts, including metalwork, in which activity he was tempted by the devil, whom Dunstan captured by the nose with his blacksmith's tongs. A different insight into the presence of mining communities and consideration of metals in theory and in practice is revealed by the Dominican scholar Albert the Great, active in the middle of the 13th century, who wrote in his Book of Minerals a lapidary, and in this book recorded his visits to mines. For at one time, he says, I became a wanderer, making long journeys to mining districts, so that I could learn by observation the nature of metals. Albert goes on to stress a need for an understanding of alchemy to complement knowledge by observation, as he says, and for the same reason I have inquired into the transmutations of metals in alchemy, so as to learn from this, too, something of their natural and accidental properties. To alchemy we will return, For the moment we stay with Dunstan and the high status given to those able to cast and work in metal. A high place was accorded to the practitioners of the craft within monastic communities. The Chronicle of Evesham Abbey, for example, records that Abbot Manig, from the middle of the 11th century, was learned in sacred letters and in many other arts, singing, writing, painting, and being skilled in the craft of gold-working, he was considered to be the greatest master of nearly all others in the land. At Canterbury and at Coventry Abbey, as in many other places, he did much excellent work at that time. And this craft connects to one of the central features of Christian society, the notion that all humans, by the sin of Adam and Eve, were fallen, diminished from the state in which they had been created originally, requiring salvation and forgiveness for this original sin. In the first half of the 12th century, an extraordinary treatise on glassmaking, painting and metalwork, probably by the monk Roger of Helmershausen in Germany, begins with a description of the creation and fall. Humanity, made in the image and likeness of God, animated by the divine breath, was deceived by the devil. Loss of original nature, including immortality through this disobedience, had few compensations, but one element that did survive, according to Roger, was the capacity to manipulate nature. To be inspired by God to acquire and hone skills in making is, in this sense, to honour the purpose of human creation, to worship the Creator. Artistic craft and skill, correctly learnt and appropriately applied, are as much a part of grasping, however fleetingly, the inheritance of Eden as textual learning. Similar care is taken by the scholar Alexander Neckham in the 1170s in a wordless treatise on how to list the tools with which a goldsmith should operate. Alexander Neckham says he should have a little hammer to make gold leaf, and at other times sheets of silver, at other times of iron, at other times of tin, at other times of copper, and at other times of brass. And he should have a very sharp chisel, with which he may be able to shape and form many figures in amber or adamant or marble or jacinth or emerald or carbuncle or jasper or sapphire or pearl. He should also have a hare's foot, with which he may smooth and polish and rub the surface of gold and silver. Unless granules of metal is lost, he should collect them in a leather apron. Moreover, he should have vessels and bottles and small vases, which represent the work of the potter, and a toothed saw and a line and an orphrey and a silver thread with which cracked goblets may be fittingly sewn together or put together. He should be as skilled in the work of embroidery, in a feathered pattern as in metalwork, as much in the work of casting as in the work of embossing. Examples like the Gloucester candlestick, made in the first decade of the 12th century, 58 centimetres tall and made of bronze with a very heavy silver content, possibly the result of being cast from an old coin hoard, shows both the scale and intricacy of high medieval metalwork. A phrase inscribed onto the candlestick links physical form to spiritual function. May this mass of light and this work of virtue ablaze with teaching, teach humankind not to be overshadowed by vice. But in order to understand what metals were thought to be, we need to shift our focus to the nature of the medieval universe. The medieval universe was the inheritance of cosmological models from ancient Greek astronomy, in particular Aristotle and Ptolemy, which consisted of a series of spheres associated with the planets, the wandering stars, visible to the naked eye: Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon, with the Earth at the centre of all of this, and still. The basic division of the universe was between the spheres above the Moon, which were perfect, moving only diurnally, getting faster as they go higher, and composed of ether, the fifth element, and the sphere of the world, below the Moon, composed of the four elements fire, air, and water and earth, intermingled, in which motion was unpredictable, transmutation possible, and everything unstable and subject to decay. Two basic rules applied throughout the universe. Heavy things move towards the centre, and everything below is affected by everything above. In this system, then, it is natural that the planets above should exercise an influence on things below, which is the basic claim of astrology. The inheritance of Greek ideas via translation into Latin was enlarged in the 12th century by the same process with respect to Arabic language scholarship on astronomy, astrology, and alchemy, amongst other subjects, adding the works of Abu Mashar, Ibn Sina, Al-Faragani, Al-Battani, Al-Kindi, and Al-Batruji, to name but a few, to Latin experience. Astrology could be used for predictive purposes. Horoscopes, as you see here, seem to have been in vogue in Northern Europe over the course of the 12th century and onwards, and this activity the Church frowned upon as undermining of free will. But the principles of planetary effects also underpin medical practice, the best times, for example, to take a bloodletting, and in the case of alchemy, the best times to transmute metals, and these actions the Church had less of an issue with. Alchemy is the origin of modern chemistry and is concerned in its basic aspects with turning metals to or back to gold. It is a subject that claims many ancient roots in China, in Western Asia, in ancient Greece, and in Islamic regions, as well as in Latin Christendom. Metals lie at the heart of the exercise and are associated with the characteristics and qualities of the planets. A 12th century author, known as Artephius, probably active in the Iberian Peninsula, lists them as follows. For lead is on account of Saturn. Its nature is like its nature. Tin, indeed, is on account of Jupiter. Iron, of Mars. Gold, of the Sun, its nature like its nature. Mercury, on account of Mercury. Silver, on account of the Moon. Copper, on account of Venus, its nature like its nature. Robert Grosseteste made the issue clearer. For all metals should by intention of nature be gold, and they do not differ from gold except as the imperfect differs from the perfect. For when the power of the sun moves pure sulphurous smoke, mixing it with pure quicksilver, and decocts it at a moderate decoction, gold is generated. What Grosseteste indicates here, as well, is the process and language of alchemy, the fume, sulphurous smoke, and mixture with mercury, quicksilver, and decoction. And while alchemy was ultimately non-verifiable, it remained popular and orthodox until well after the Middle Ages. Metals, as Albert the Great knew, needed to be understood according to their nature, which was intimately related to the planets and to the very structure of creation. Attitudes towards the works of nature, and in particular to animals and plants, offer a complementary vision. Here we have another example of an organizational compilation with ancient antecedents, the herbal, showing in this case mugwort, tansy, and feverfew. The other part to the understanding of the world in Latin Christendom was the notion of the divine creation, that, unlike Aristotle, the medieval Christian universe came into being in a single moment of time and will also come to an end. The first Genesis creation story, with the count of 6 days, remained a popular text for commentary from the early church to the end of the Middle Ages, and enjoyed particular popularity in the 12th and 13th centuries. And here the place of animals is significant. Adam and Eve were given the lordship of the world by God with all of the responsibilities that entailed, including the naming of the animals. Animals are ubiquitous for medieval society as a source of labour, food, clothing, a display of wealth, and, in terms of parchment, the medium for the very record of that society which survives. The close bond between humans and animals is shown in any number of different ways. Medieval scholars, following their ancient masters, knew that the only thing to separate the animal from the human was the capacity for higher reasoning. Animals were often associated with the most holy of humans, from St. Giles and the deer, St. Jerome and the lion, St. Francis preaching to the birds and fish, and St. Gertrude of Nivelles, the patron saint of cats. Closer to home, at least my home, in the north of England, Bede records the story of how, during his time at Melrose, the younger Cuthbert prayed in the sea for a whole night, a grueling ascetic experience. On leaving the water, he was comforted, warmed, and dried by 2 otters. And we have an imagining of that scene here in a 12th century manuscript. From the 12th century onwards, and at its peak in the 13th and 14th centuries, a distinctive genre of compilation evolved, the bestiary. These books, often illustrated, present mammals, birds and reptiles, and include minerals and plant life, most of which are well known in terms of the animals, others are more exotic or mythical, and the bestiary compilers put all of these in for a variety of different purposes. Adapting classical and early Christian learning, and combining this with observation and imagination, and holding the alleged behaviours of animals up as moral mirrors for humans, seems to be the main form and purpose. Otters do not, in fact, feature in bestiaries, though beavers are very common. The bestiary, then, as the lapidary, offers fascinating insight onto the ordering of nature and the integrity of each part of creation to the whole. Adam and Eve, as noted earlier, were given lordship, dominion over the world, its resources and its creatures. Medieval society was hierarchical, with more responsibility accruing and more rules to follow the higher the position. Schema were drawn up for angelic beings and for people within society. One of the central political questions of the whole period was the relationship between secular authority and the church, popes, emperors, archbishops and kings. And this is all mirrored in the heavens, in the order and harmony of the spheres, and, although disordered, in the effects and products of their influence on the world below. Thank you very much.